The old pickup truck rattled down the dusty country road, its faded green paint telling stories of years gone by. Behind the wheel sat Staff Sergeant James Cooper, his military dog tags hanging quietly from the rearview mirror. The evening sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple as he drove the familiar route that would take him home. Cooper had changed since he left this place 4 years ago. His face was harder now, marked by the things he'd seen during his 4th deployment. His hair was still cut short in military style, and his eyes constantly scanned the road ahead, a habit he couldn't shake after years of watching for hidden dangers in foreign lands. The truck's radio played soft country music, barely audible over the engine's steady rumble. Cooper didn't mind the noise. It was better than the silence that made his mind wander to places he'd rather forget. His tan combat boots tapped gently against the floor mat as he drove, matching the rhythm of an old Johnny Cash song. Up ahead, he spotted the old miller's barn. The sight brought a slight smile to his face. That barn had been there since he was a kid, its weathered wood and rusty roof a constant landmark in these parts. Local teenagers used to dare each other to spend the night there, claiming it was haunted. Cooper remembered winning $5 for doing just that when he was 15. The barn stood alone in a field of tall grass, surrounded by ancient oak trees that had seen more years than anyone alive. Its large doors hung slightly crooked, and patches of sunlight peeked through holes in the roof, but somehow it still stood strong against time and weather, much like Cooper himself. This road was his shortcut home, cutting through 20 minutes of driving time compared to the main highway. Not many people used it anymore, especially since the Miller family moved away 10 years ago. The solitude suited Cooper just fine. After months of living in crowded bases and noisy camps, the quiet country road was exactly what he needed. As he drove past the barn, Cooper noticed some fresh tire tracks in the dirt. That was unusual. This road rarely saw traffic besides the occasional farmer's truck or local teenager's car. His trained eye picked up other details too. Cigarette butts near the fence, a few beer cans glinting in the grass. Someone had been using the old barn recently. The sun was getting lower now, casting long shadows across the road. Cooper's truck moved steadily forward, the engines echoing across the empty fields. He wore civilian clothes, a simple black t-shirt and blue jeans, but his military bearing was still evident in his straight posture and alert eyes. In his rearview mirror, Cooper could see the barn getting smaller. The evening light made it look almost peaceful, its old wood glowing golden in the sunset. He had driven this road hundreds of times before joining the army, but something felt different today. Maybe it was just him that had changed. 4 tours of duty had a way of making even the most familiar things seem strange. The truck's radio crackled with static as it lost signal for a moment. Cooper reached over to adjust it, his movements precise and economical, another habit from his military years. As he did so, his eyes caught something new in the mirror. Dust clouds rising in the distance behind him. Someone else was on the road. Cooper didn't think much of it at first. This was still America, after all, not a combat zone. But years of training had taught him to trust his instincts, and something about those dust clouds made him sit up a little straighter. The sun glinted off something metallic in the distance. Maybe chrome, maybe steel. The peaceful evening drive was about to become something very different, though Cooper didn't know it yet. He just kept driving, one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting casually on his thigh. The old barn disappeared from view as he rounded a bend, and the dust clouds behind him grew larger. Little did Cooper know that his quiet journey home was about to take an unexpected turn, and the skills he had learned in the military would soon be put to use in a way he never expected on American soil. The dust clouds in Cooper's rearview mirror grew larger, and soon the rumble of motorcycle engines filled the quiet evening air. 3 black Harley-Davidson motorcycles appeared, their chrome pipes gleaming in the fading sunlight. The riders wore leather vests covered in patches, their faces hidden behind dark helmets. At first, Cooper paid them little attention. He kept his truck steady at 45 miles per hour, staying in his lane and letting the bikers pass if they wanted to. But they didn't pass. Instead, they moved closer, playing a dangerous game of cat and mouse with his pickup truck. The lead biker, a massive man on a custom Harley, pulled up alongside Cooper's driver's side window. Even through the helmet's visor, Cooper could see the man's eyes studying him. The other two bikers spread out, one staying behind the truck, the other moving to the passenger side. It was a tactical formation, something Cooper recognized from his military training, though these men were using it for very different purposes. "Great," Cooper muttered to himself, his voice calm despite the situation. He noticed how the bikers had boxed him in, using a technique that showed this wasn't their first time harassing someone on this lonely road. The lead biker revved his engine loudly, then made a motion for Cooper to pull over. Cooper weighed his options, his military training kicking in automatically, assessing the threat level and possible escape routes. The road ahead curved around the old miller's barn, which was now visible again. The fields on either side were too rough for his truck to drive through without damage. His best option was to face whatever these men wanted. Slowly, Cooper eased his foot off the gas and guided his truck onto the gravel shoulder near the barn. Dust billowed around the vehicles as they came to a stop. The three bikers circled around once before parking their motorcycles in a way that made it difficult for Cooper to drive away quickly. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows from the barn across the road. Cooper watched in his side mirror as the three men dismounted their bikes. They moved with the confidence of people used to getting their way through intimidation. The leader was well over 6 feet tall, his arms covered in tattoos that were visible even under his leather jacket. The other two were smaller but moved with the same aggressive swagger. Cooper remained in his truck, engine running, hands resting calmly on the steering wheel. Through his training, he had learned to control his breathing in tense situations. Right now, his breath was steady and even his mind clear and alert. He watched as the bikers approached, noting how they positioned themselves, one on each side of his truck, the leader coming straight up to his window. The leader knocked on Cooper's window with a gloved hand, the sound echoing in the quiet evening air. Birds scattered from the old barn's roof at the noise. Cooper rolled down his window halfway, keeping a barrier between himself and the man outside. The smell of leather and motorcycle exhaust filled his truck. "Nice evening for a drive," the leader said, his voice rough and mocking. He leaned down to peer into the truck, revealing a thick beard and a scar running along his jaw. "But you're on the wrong road, friend. This hayrace a private route and there's a toll for using it." Cooper could see the other two bikers in his mirrors. They were grinning, enjoying what they thought would be an easy intimidation. One of them was playing with something in his pocket. Probably a knife, Cooper thought, noting how the man's jacket bulged slightly on one side. The evening had grown quieter, with only the idle rumble of engines breaking the silence. A cool breeze blew through the open window, carrying with it the musty smell of the old barn. Cooper's truck radio still played softly, Johnny Cash's voice a quiet backdrop to the tense situation. The leader was waiting for Cooper's response, his patience visibly wearing thin. Behind him, the sun had dipped lower, turning the sky a deep orange. But Cooper didn't speak yet. He was still watching, still assessing, his military training telling him to gather all the information before making his move. "I don't see any toll signs," Cooper said calmly, his voice steady and controlled. His eyes never stopped moving, taking in every detail of the situation. The leader's face turned red with anger at Cooper's calm response. This wasn't how their victims usually acted. "Signs?" The biker leader let out a harsh laugh. "Were the signs, soldier boy? I can tell by that haircut you're military. Well, this ain't the army, this is our road." He cracked his knuckles loudly, trying to add weight to his threat. Cooper noticed how the two other bikers had moved closer. The one on the passenger side was now standing near the truck's hood, while the other remained by the driver's side rear wheel. Their body language showed they were ready for trouble, but their stance was sloppy, nothing like the disciplined movements Cooper had learned in the military. "How much is your toll?" Cooper asked, still sitting in his truck. His right hand remained visible on the steering wheel, while his left hand rested casually on his leg. The leader smiled, thinking Cooper was giving in to their demands. $200 ought to cover it, the leader said, leaning closer to the window. "Plus whatever else you got in your wallet. Consider it a fee for safe passage." Behind him, his two friends chuckled, already counting their easy money. Cooper took a deep breath. The evening air was growing cooler, and shadows from the old barn stretched across the road like dark fingers. He could smell the leather from the bikers' jackets, mixing with the scent of gasoline and dust. "That's quite a high toll," Cooper said, his voice still calm. He turned off his truck's engine, the sudden silence making everything feel more intense. The leader's grin grew wider, thinking Cooper was surrendering to their demands. "Well, that's the price for using our road, soldier boy," the leader sneered. "Now why don't you step out here, and we can handle this business properly." His hand patted the truck door, the sound echoing in the quiet evening air. Cooper noticed how the biker's feet were positioned, wrong for any quick movement. His special forces training had taught him to spot these details. The other two bikers were also making mistakes. Standing too close together, their weight distributed poorly. Slowly, Cooper unbuckled his seatbelt. The click seemed loud in the tense silence. The bikers watched eagerly, expecting to see fear in their victim's eyes. Instead, they saw something they didn't understand: complete calmness. "All right," Cooper said, reaching for his door handle. "Let's talk about this toll." His movements were smooth and controlled as he opened the door. The leader stepped back, giving Cooper space to exit the truck. As Cooper stepped out, the gravel crunched under his combat boots. He stood straight, his posture relaxed but ready. The leader was taller than him by several inches, but Cooper didn't seem bothered by this fact. "Check his wallet," the leader ordered one of his men. The smaller biker moved forward, his hand already reaching out. Cooper didn't move, but his eyes tracked every movement around him. The old barn creaked in the evening wind, its weathered boards making sounds like old bones. A few crows watched from the roof, their black shapes outlined against the darkening sky. They seemed to know something was about to happen. "I'll give you one chance," Cooper said quietly, his words carrying clearly in the still air. "Get on your bikes and leave." His tone wasn't threatening. It was a simple statement of fact. The three bikers looked at each other, then burst out laughing. The sound echoed off the barn's walls, scaring away the watching crows. They had heard threats before, but never from someone who seemed so calm about it. "Or what, soldier boy? The leader, are you going to call in an airstrike?" the leader asked, stepping closer to Cooper. His friends laughed again, but something in Cooper's steady gaze made their laughter sound hollow. The sun had almost set, casting long shadows across the scene. The old barn stood as a silent witness to what was about to unfold. Cooper remained perfectly still, his breathing steady, his mind clear. 4 tours of duty had taught him exactly how to handle situations like this. The first punch came exactly as Cooper expected it would: wild, uncontrolled, and telegraphed from a mile away. The smaller biker, trying to show off for his leader, swung his fist toward Cooper's face. But Cooper wasn't there anymore. He had shifted slightly, letting the punch pass harmlessly through the air where his head had been just a moment before. "That," Cooper said calmly, "was your second mistake. Your first was stopping my truck." His voice remained steady, almost conversational. The smaller biker looked confused, not understanding how he had missed such an easy target. The leader's face darkened with anger. He wasn't used to people standing up to his gang, and he certainly wasn't used to them making his men look foolish. "Get him," he growled, and both of his friends moved forward at once. Cooper watched them come, his trained eyes noting every detail. Their footwork was wrong, crossing their feet as they moved, throwing themselves off balance. Their hands were up, but their guards were full of holes. These men might be used to bar fights and bullying, but they had never faced someone with real combat training. The evening wind picked up, rustling through the tall grass around the old barn. Cooper took a small step backward, drawing the bikers forward. It was a simple tactical move, one he had learned years ago. Make your opponents come to you, let them waste energy and make mistakes. "Last chance," Cooper warned them, his boots finding solid ground on the gravel. "Walk away now." His eyes moved constantly, tracking all 3 men, noting their positions, seeing the tension in their muscles before they moved. The leader pulled out a knife, its blade catching the last rays of sunlight. "Not so tough now, are you, soldier boy?" he sneered. But Cooper noticed the slight shake in his hand. The man wasn't used to facing someone who didn't show fear. Cooper's mind flashed back to his training. He remembered his instructor's words. Fear is normal. Control it, use it, let it sharpen your focus. Right now, he felt no fear, just a calm awareness of everything around him. The gravel under his feet, the position of his truck behind him, the old barn to his right, and 3 men who were about to learn a hard lesson. The smaller biker tried another punch, this time aiming for Cooper's ribs. Again, Cooper moved just enough to avoid it. He didn't counterattack, not yet. He was still giving them a chance to realize their mistake. Stand still. The biker yelled in frustration, his face red with anger and embarrassment. His friend circled to Cooper's other side, trying to trap him between them. It might have worked against an ordinary person, but Cooper was far from ordinary. The leader flipped his knife, trying to look intimidating. You think you're smart, don't you? Think your fancy military training means something out here? He moved forward, his boots crunching on the gravel. This ain't a war zone, soldier boy. This is our territory. Cooper almost felt sorry for them. They had no idea what they were dealing with. His 4 tours of duty hadn't just taught him how to fight. They had taught him how to think, how to stay calm under pressure, and how to handle multiple opponents. The sun had nearly set now, painting the sky in deep purples and reds. The old barn's shadow stretched across the scene like a giant hand. A few bats had emerged, circling overhead, their quiet swooping adding to the tense atmosphere. You're right, Cooper said, his voice still calm. This isn't a war zone. That's why I'm giving you another chance to leave. His hands remained loose at his sides, ready, but not tense. The leader's knife glinted again as he shifted his grip. The bikers looked at each other, uncertainty finally starting to creep into their expressions. Something about Cooper's calmness was unsettling them. People usually begged or tried to run by now. Nobody just stood there, perfectly relaxed, facing 3 armed men. Cooper watched them, his military training letting him read their body language like a book. He could see the doubt in their eyes, the growing realization that maybe, just maybe, they had picked the wrong target. But pride and anger would win out over common sense. He could see that too. Everything happened in 6 seconds. The leader lunged forward with his knife, expecting Cooper to back away in fear. Instead, Cooper stepped into the attack. His left hand caught the leader's wrist, his grip like iron from years of training. His right hand came up in a short, sharp movement that struck the leader's elbow. There was a sound like a twig snapping, and the knife fell from the leader's now useless fingers. The big man's eyes went wide with shock and pain. Before he could scream, Cooper turned the leader's momentum against him, sending him face-first into the gravel road. 2 to go, Cooper said quietly, already moving as the other bikers rushed him. The smaller one reached him first, throwing wild punches that hit nothing but air. Cooper stepped past the clumsy attacks like a dancer avoiding raindrops. The 3rd biker tried to grab Cooper from behind while he was distracted. It might have worked on someone else, but Cooper had trained for situations like this. He dropped his shoulder and shifted his weight, using the biker's own momentum to flip him over. The man landed hard on his back, all the air rushing from his lungs. Stay down, Cooper advised. But they didn't listen. The smaller biker pulled out a chain from his pocket, swinging it in what he thought was a threatening manner. Cooper almost sighed. He had fought against trained soldiers and guerrilla fighters. A bike chain didn't impress him. The chain whistled through the air, but Cooper was already moving. His hand caught the chain mid-swing, wrapping it around his fist. One sharp pull and the smaller biker stumbled forward right into Cooper's knee. The impact wasn't hard enough to cause serious damage, but it was enough to send the man sprawling next to his leader. 3 years in Special Forces, Cooper said, his breathing still calm and steady. 4 tours of duty, and none of you thought to ask why I wasn't afraid. He unwrapped the chain from his hand, letting it fall to the gravel. The 3rd biker had managed to get back to his feet. He looked at his fallen friends, then at Cooper, who stood relaxed but ready. Fear finally replaced the anger in the biker's eyes. He reached behind his back, and Cooper saw the glint of a pistol grip. Don't, Cooper said, his voice carrying a note of command that made the biker freeze. You really don't want to escalate this. The way Cooper looked at him made the biker realize that pulling the gun would be the last mistake he ever made. The leader groaned from where he lay in the gravel, holding his injured arm. The smaller biker was curled up, trying to catch his breath. The third biker's hand slowly moved away from his hidden gun. What are you?" the third biker asked, his voice shaking. The sun had set completely now, leaving them in the purple twilight. The old barn loomed behind them like a silent judge. "Just a soldier trying to drive home," Cooper replied. He moved to the leader's dropped knife and kicked it away into the tall grass. "But you had to make it complicated." Headlights appeared in the distance. A car approaching. Cooper knew he needed to end this situation quickly. He looked at each biker in turn, his gaze more effective than any threat. "Hey Race, what's gonna happen?" he said, his voice firm but calm. "You're gonna get on your bikes, you're gonna ride away, and you're gonna find a new road to haunt. Because if I ever see you here again." He let the sentence hang unfinished in the evening air. The third biker was already backing toward his motorcycle. The smaller one had managed to get to his knees, his face pale. The leader stayed where he was, his arm clearly injured but not seriously enough to need immediate medical attention. "Your arm will heal in a few weeks," Cooper told the leader. "Consider it a reminder of why you shouldn't judge people by how they look." He stepped back, giving them space to retreat. The approaching car was getting closer, its headlights cutting through the growing darkness. As it got nearer, Cooper could see it was a police cruiser, its roof lights suddenly flashing to life. The local sheriff's department had arrived, probably called by someone who had seen the confrontation from the main road. The three bikers froze like deer in headlights. The leader was still on the ground, cradling his arm. The smaller biker had managed to stand up but was swaying slightly. The third one stood near his motorcycle, looking nervously between Cooper and the approaching police car. "Evening, Sheriff," Cooper called out as the cruiser came to a stop. The door opened, and Sheriff Mike Thompson stepped out. He was an older man with gray hair and the kind of face that had seen everything the county had to offer. "James Cooper," the sheriff said, recognizing him. "Heard you were back from deployment." He looked around at the scene, taking in the three bikers and the scattered weapons on the ground. "I see you've met our local troublemakers." Cooper nodded, staying relaxed but alert. "They wanted to charge me a toll for using this road," he explained. "We had a disagreement about that." The way he said it made the sheriff's mouth twitch into a small smile. The leader of the bikers tried to stand up, his face twisted with pain and anger. "He attacked us," he shouted, pointing at Cooper with his good arm. "We were just talking, and he went crazy." Sheriff Thompson walked closer, his boots crunching on the gravel. "That right?" he asked, but he wasn't looking at Cooper. His eyes were fixed on the knife lying in the grass and the chain that one of the bikers had dropped. "Seems like an awful lot of hardware for just talking." Cooper said calmly, "I found out a few things about them real quick. 1, they're not very good at fighting. 2, they're even worse at lying." He gestured to the weapons on the ground. 3, they make poor choices about who to threaten. The sheriff pulled out his flashlight, shining it around the scene. The old barn stood silent behind them, its weathered walls now dark against the night sky. The beam of light passed over each biker in turn, revealing their bruised pride more than their injuries. "We've had reports about you three," Sheriff Thompson said to the bikers. "Harassing drivers, demanding money, causing trouble. But nobody would press charges, they were too scared." He clicked off his flashlight. "Looks like you finally picked the wrong target." The third biker, who still hadn't said anything, suddenly made a dash for his motorcycle. He didn't get far. Cooper's foot shot out, catching the bike's front wheel as the biker tried to start it. The machine toppled, sending its rider sprawling. "That was another poor choice," Cooper said, his voice still calm. The sheriff nodded in agreement, pulling out his handcuffs. "Attempted robbery, carrying concealed weapons, assault." Sheriff Thompson listed off the charges as he secured the leader's wrists. "You boys are going to have a lot to explain down at the station." More police cars were arriving now, their lights painting the old barn in alternating red and blue. The smaller biker had given up any thought of resistance, sitting quietly on the ground. The third one was being helped up by a deputy who had just arrived. Cooper stood back, watching as the police handled the situation. His military training had taught him not just how to fight, but when to step aside and let the proper authorities take over. Sheriff Thompson walked over to him after handing off the leader to another deputy. "Nice work," the sheriff said quietly. "Though I have to ask, did you really need to damage his arm?" Cooper shook his head. "It's just a nerve strike. He'll have full use of it in about an hour." Figured it was better than letting him keep swinging that knife around. The sheriff nodded approvingly. "Well, the county thanks you. These three have been a problem for months." He pulled out his notebook. "They'll need a statement from you, but it can wait until tomorrow if you'd rather head home now." The old barn creaked in the night wind, its shadow now broken up by the flashing police lights. The three bikers were being loaded into separate patrol cars, their motorcycles impounded as evidence. 2 days after the incident at the old barn, Cooper sat in Sheriff Thompson's office, finishing up his official statement. The small police station was quiet except for the gentle hum of an old ceiling fan and the ticking of a wall clock. "Well, that about does it," Sheriff Thompson said, putting down his pen. He looked at Cooper with respect in his eyes. "You know, those three have been terrorizing folks around here for the better part of a year. Nobody would stand up to them. Even the local truckers started taking the long way around to avoid that road." Cooper took a sip from the coffee the sheriff had offered him. It wasn't great coffee, but Head had worse during his deployments. "Sometimes people like that need to learn a lesson," he said simply. "How's the leader's arm?" The sheriff chuckled. "Just like you said, he got feeling back in it after about an hour. Doctor checked him out and said there wasn't any permanent damage, though his pride might take longer to heal." He shuffled some papers on his desk. "They're facing multiple charges. With all the complaints we've had, plus what they tried to pull with you, they'll be enjoying county hospitality for a while." A deputy knocked on the office door and entered with more papers. "Sir, we've got 5 more people coming forward with complaints about those bikers. Seems like folks aren't scared to speak up anymore." Cooper nodded, understanding how fear could keep people silent. He'd seen it overseas, how a few bullies could control whole neighborhoods until someone finally stood up to them. Sometimes that's all it took to break their power. "Found some interesting things on their phones too," the sheriff continued after the deputy left. "Looks like they were running quite an operation: extortion, illegal toll collection, threatening people. They've got a good lawyer, but with all this evidence, they won't be causing trouble around here anymore." The old wall clock struck 10, its chimes echoing in the small office. Through the window, Cooper could see the main street of the small town. People were going about their business freely, without looking over their shoulders. "Your military training really made a difference," Sheriff Thompson said, leaning back in his chair. "The way you handled it, controlled, professional, no excessive force, just enough to stop the threat. We could use someone like you on the force, you know." Cooper smiled but shook his head. "Thanks, Sheriff, but I've got other plans. Thinking of starting a self-defense class at the community center. Teach people how to protect themselves, build confidence, maybe prevent situations like this from happening." The sheriff's face lit up. "Now that's a good idea. It'll spread the word. A lot of folks around here could benefit from that kind of training." He stood up and extended his hand. "You did this community a real service, Cooper." As they shook hands, another deputy appeared at the door. "Sir, the impound lot called. They're asking what to do with those 3 motorcycles." "Sell them," the sheriff replied. "Court ordered them seized as evidence of criminal activity. Money will go to the county victims fund." He turned to Cooper. "Seems fitting, doesn't it? They're tools of intimidation being used to help the people they hurt." Cooper gathered his jacket and prepared to leave. The morning sun was streaming through the office windows, making the sheriff's badge shine bright on his desk. "One more thing," Sheriff Thompson said. "The old miller's barn. The county's thinking of fixing it up, making it a historic site. Maybe put up some signs about its history." "Good idea," Cooper replied, smiling. "Though it's got one more story to add to its history now." As Cooper walked out of the police station, he felt satisfied. Not just because he had stopped 3 bullies, but because he had helped make his hometown a little safer. His military training had taught him that true strength wasn't about causing harm. It was about protecting others and standing up for what was right. The morning was bright and clear, and the road ahead was open. No more illegal tolls. No more intimidation. Just the way it should be. 2 weeks after the incident, the local newspaper ran a front-page story about Cooper's self-defense classes. The community center's main room was packed with people of all ages, eager to learn from the soldier who had stood up to the notorious biker gang. Remember, Cooper said to his class, standing at the front of the room, the best fight is the one you can avoid. He looked over the crowd, teenagers, elderly folks, working men and women. They all shared the same look of determination in their eyes. Mrs. Johnson, who owned the local diner, raised her hand. But what if we can't avoid it, like what happened to you at the old barn? She had been one of the many people who used to take the long way around to avoid the bikers. Cooper nodded, understanding her concern. That's why we're here, not to learn how to fight, but to learn how to be prepared. He demonstrated a simple defensive stance. Confidence often prevents trouble. When bullies see that you're not an easy target, they usually look elsewhere. News of the 3 bikers' arrest had spread quickly through the small town. Their court date was set for next month, and the district attorney had a strong case, thanks to all the people who had come forward. The story had even reached neighboring counties, where similar groups had suddenly become much less active. During a water break, Sheriff Thompson stopped by the class. He stood at the back, watching as Cooper taught basic self-defense moves to the eager students. The sheriff smiled, remembering how different this was from the violence at the old barn. "Your son's doing good work," one of the elderly participants told the sheriff. It was Mr. Peters, who had been threatened by the bikers last winter. "Teaching us to be strong without being mean, that's a special kind of wisdom." Cooper continued the class, showing them how to escape from common holds. "Remember," he said, helping a young woman practice the move, "you don't need to be the strongest or the fastest. You just need to be smart and prepared." The afternoon sun streamed through the community center's windows, making the polished floor glow. Outside, people walked freely down streets that had once been avoided. The old fear was gone, replaced by a new sense of community strength. After class, several students stayed to thank Cooper. Among them was Tommy, a high school student who had been bullied at school. "Mr. Cooper," he said shyly, "I used what you taught us yesterday. I didn't have to fight. Just standing up straight and looking confident made them leave me alone." Cooper smiled, remembering his own high school days. "That's exactly right, Tommy. True strength isn't about hurting others. It's about standing tall and helping others do the same." Later that evening, Cooper drove past the old miller's barn. County workers had started fixing it up, replacing broken boards and reinforcing the old structure. A new sign stood near the road, "Historic Miller's Barn," standing strong since 1892. He pulled over for a moment, looking at the barn in the evening light. The place where he had faced down 3 armed men was now becoming a symbol of community pride. Workers had cleared away the weeds and fixed the fence. Local artists were planning to paint a mural on one wall, telling the barn's many stories. The sound of motorcycles made Cooper look up, but these weren't troublemakers. It was a group of local riders, members of a legitimate motorcycle club who helped with charity runs. They waved as they passed, respecting both the man and what he stood for. Sheriff Thompson's words from earlier that day echoed in Cooper's mind. "You didn't just stop 3 criminals, you showed people they don't have to live in fear." As Cooper drove home, he passed several of the students from the self-defense class. They walked with new confidence, heads held high, no longer worried about who might be waiting around the next corner. That, he thought, was the greatest victory of all. The sun was setting behind the old barn, its golden light making the fresh paint glow. Like the community it watched over, the barn stood stronger now than before, its scars becoming part of its story of resilience and renewal.